Welcome to the Superpower Success Podcast. At Keystone, we believe exceptional organizations don't just happen. They are built by focused leaders that recognize their authentic leadership superpowers. Join us for a serious dose of inspiration.
Welcome to the Superpower Success Podcast. We have a guest here for you today that is going to be a little different, but also I love it because I'm pretty sure her and I could complete each other's sentence when it comes to business growth and strategy. So I'm looking forward to learning from her, and the rest of you just get to listen. So you're welcome for that. I've got Leah Berend here. She is a private equity investor. She's a self-proclaimed business strategist, which is exactly what I would say I am. She's got a podcast called The Future of Private Equity, which I can't wait to hear a little bit more about. And she is a soon-to-be author. So we check a lot of the same boxes, Leah. I'm glad you're here, and I'm excited for this conversation.
Thank you for inviting me on the podcast. I'm excited to be here.
Well, you have some pretty impressive background, and you've got some pretty impressive things you're doing that I would say to be a change catalyst in an industry that needs it. So I want you to just start with, this definition of success. And so many of us, you and I both know, the road's never straight, right? Where you're getting. So tell us a little bit about what this journey has been getting to this point and this level of success for you.
I have a very winding journey. My bachelor's degree is English linguistics, and that was because it was the fastest degree I could get after doing 2 years of PSEO at the University of Minnesota in high school. And I capitalized on Minnesota's great program to get some free college. I grew up in Richfield, average girl. I was homeschooled growing up. So I had a little bit different of an education growing up, but still, really was eager to dive in and have loved learning really my whole life. And so I got an English linguistics degree, and I graduated right during the recession. And so 2009, there weren't a whole lot of linguistics jobs. And so I went back to school and I got a master's of organizational leadership because I was 19 when I graduated college, and I was like, okay, I'm going places. Let's do this. And nobody wants to hire a 21-year-old with an organizational leadership degree to do leadership in their organization. I quickly found out, but that was okay. I worked my way up in the organization that I was with and had just the best mentors along the way. One gentleman in particular, Robert Normant, he had created Normant Securities and sold it back in the 90s. They did the bulletproof glass for the White House. So he had this prolific career as a businessman, and he took me under his wing, and he and his family had started a college program. And so I was part of that, and I helped them with their accreditation and helped them just do all the things needed to start this up. And so from that point on, it gave me, and he gave me such a good education in what it takes to run a business. And I learned that. And then as I went throughout my career and worked in small to mid-sized companies, I took that and I kept taking on more, and I kept wanting to do more. And I just had this ambition to do more, but realized I didn't have the financial acumen to run my own business one day. I just didn't know how to read a financial statement. I felt kind of like I was limping along if I would have ever wanted to go out on my own. And so I went back to school a little later on, got a master's of accountancy and a CPA. And that really helped round out my career. And while I was there, I happened to be at a alternative investment due diligence firm. When I was hired there, I didn't know what an alternative investment was, and I didn't know what due diligence was. And from there, I was given this amazing gift of an education kind of in the deep end of finance. And that really helped propel my career forward to where it is now.
I love that. And I want to talk about this maybe a little bit later in private equity, but that financial acumen for women specifically is something that I think impedes us from getting to the corporate boardroom. It's a really scary thing to not have it. I am an example, right? I'm running a business and I just surround myself with really smart
Mhm.
people who know it. But I think it holds so many of us back. And it's not just probably women, right? But that just for you to go back and get that and realize like this was a basic building block of where you were trying to go, I think is really fascinating.
I had a really big self-limiting belief in my schooling years that I was bad at math. It didn't click instantly for me. And so I just limited myself to the arts and English and language instead of diving more into economics and finance and accounting. And it turns out that was my passion all along. Even before I went back for the degree, I was super into investing. I just didn't know the numbers behind it. And so this really cemented and was more of an affirmation than I ever thought it would be. And of just the things I had already learned on my own. And so that was incredibly empowering to be able to then take that. And now I'm a huge advocate for becoming financially literate yourself so that you can, take the reins on your financial and your wealth building.
I love that. So I want to talk a little bit about your leadership journey. As you've gone through, right, all these experiences, and even in your schooling, and you've had more years of schooling than most people like will ever have. Like it's unbelievable. But like you talk about the mentors that have been in your life. Was there a leadership moment or a time when you're like, oh, this is what leadership means, or this is what leadership doesn't mean? Like where you learned like what kind of leader you wanted to be, and do you remember that formative moment?
Yes. There were a lot of things that really surprised me getting into the work world. I would say, I've had jobs since I was 14, so I've been paying into Social Security for over 20 years now, which I like to brag about. But along the way, that guy I mentioned before, Robert Norman, he said, know the conditions of your flocks and herds. That was always he was an old Southern guy and he would always bring out these sayings. And knowing the conditions of your flocks and herds to me meant be present with your people, be present with what's going on in your business, and be somebody who they can reach out to for that support and that help. And I think along the way, as I've led teams and grown businesses, um, it's it's that attention and it's that creating a collaborative environment that has really meant so much to the people and the teams that I've built. And I think I've learned that the hard way in a lot of different roles where I was encountered a lot of resistance to transparency, resistance to bringing more people into the fold, bring resistance to information sharing. Probably would have really helped the company grow, and so saw that firsthand in some of the companies that I've worked for, and that really propelled me in a direction to say, no, that's important. If you're sharing information and if you're listening to other people's perspectives, you can grow so much faster and so much better.
And I love this idea too, just in the time we're in right now, right? And we're recording kind of end of July-ish in 2024. But this be present in your leadership, I think really applies right now to leaders being able to just kind of put headphones on for everything else that's happening outside and be present with their team and
Mhm.
be present and aware of our energy that we're bringing in, because it is definitely a time where you could get caught up in a lot of other things going on, and we all know what those
Oh my
things
goodness.
are. We don't need to list them, but I think it's a good reminder. Like you're giving me a reminder to like we need to bring it back here and be present in for our team and for our
Mhm.
families, right? Both.
I'm on a little bit of a tirade about that now, Jamie, as I've gone into launching my own firm, and I'd love to talk about that more later. But um, the driver for that, in so many ways, is that kind of leadership bent of saying, if the tone at the top is striving, profit at all cost, work 24/7, never put your phone down, that's going to filter into the organization. And you know that in terms of like management and the C-suite, right? But what my thought is that, well, if that's happening at the ownership level, that's the tone at the top, right? And so you really have to know the conditions of your flocks and herds then, and be that person who's going to create the tone. And if you're, as a person, not in tune, not conscious of what's going on around you, um, and driving and going a million miles an hour, you're not in a place to be bringing along tens to hundreds of employees with you.
Right. But yet you have a huge responsibility and a huge impact on those people, whether you manage that impact well or not. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the responsibility. It's the burden that we carry as leaders. And it's the requirement that we are focusing on, developing ourselves, being super conscious of how our words matter, like really matter. Right? If people listen to the language that we use and the words we don't use. And I think it's just a really strong leadership lesson when you starting your own firm. And I do want you to talk about that a little bit, because it's hard. I mean, hello, like, right? It is not an easy road. And so what kind of got you to that point of like, I want to take this huge risk, and I'm already smart and have this great career to take this risk. And then what skills or things that you think are just inherently your superpowers, because you're on the Superpower Success podcast? Like, what do you think gave you the confidence? Like, I've got these superpowers. I know I can do this.
That's a great way to phrase it. I would say that my superpower has been boldness throughout my life, just doing it. My sister used to say, Leah, you shoot from the hip. And I've since learned to tone that down, right? But when I do engage it, when I do decide to step out, it really has had a lot of great ramifications throughout my journey, right? I stepped out and said, no, I don't have to be just bad at math. I can do accounting. No, I don't have to just sit in the controller seat. I can be a CFO. Throughout my career, it's been that boldness to just take the next step in front of me. I would say starting my own firm was really scary. I didn't expect to do it when I did it. I kind of had this thought in the back of my mind, well, maybe someday. And then it turned into, well, maybe 20 years from now, I'll be good enough. Well, maybe 10 years from now, I could do it. And then through a series of conversations with the amazing network, which is the Minneapolis business community, I started saying, I can do this. I can do this now. And it really just changed the conversation from someday to, okay, how do I make this a reality? And so I've been able to partner with some amazing people and some amazing businesses so far. It still is scary, right? Every day you're measuring and you're trying to be methodical and planful about your next steps. And especially with private equity, you have a lot of different stakeholders, and you have a thesis of what are the things that are what are the businesses that are going to be growing? What are the markets and industries? And you really have to have your pulse on what's happening in the future, in addition to the businesses that are going through transition processes now that you can capitalize on. And so there's a lot of shiny objects in private equity. It's a very storied, and there's a lot of opinions about private equity. But really at the end of the day, you're investing, you have a thesis in mind, you're investing largely other people's money into a company, and you want a great return. Where I wanted to make a change and make it different was that I wanted that people component. That's so very important, because people dedicate more time to their company and their job than sometimes they do to their family. And so I wanted that people component to be really considered within the businesses. And I wanted them to be able to have opportunities beyond just their one position now, right? I'm a big proponent, I should say, of education and going beyond and going to the next level, and helping people do that and bringing them with me, and having a big heart to do financial literacy, I kind of got started in my head thinking, what does private equity as a service look like? What do I, as a private equity investor, have to offer? Because you can be shrouded in mystery, you can be wearing the fancy shoes, you can, not tell people the full story and be covered in snake oil, right? Or you can be transparent. And to me, it's like this burden of saying, I have this financial knowledge, I can share that with employees. I can go down, to the company I invest in, and I can meet with every single person and hear from them what's going on in the company. I don't just have to talk to the CEO and CFO and be at a board level. And so it's just like that involvement of what can I do really shies away from this huge trend that I'm seeing in the market of everybody just wants to be a passive investor. They just want their money to work for them. I don't see that as the case for a true private equity investor. That is not my job.
I love your idea of boldness, and I even hear you. I think that boldness, and I think this is whether you're an entrepreneur or you work in a company or you don't work. Like it is, what do you? I sense you looked at it and said, I need to do this right now because the industry needs this. It's not a I can do it. That's one piece. That's like the first step of confidence. The purpose that I'm hearing from you, right, and the passion is, I need to do this. Like this dent needs to be made in the world, right? And I think if more of us got in tune with what that dent was for us, our dents are very aligned, you and I, because it is about the people piece for me, and it's elevating people's voices and impacting them in a different way. I just think our world would be a different place if more of us stepped into that. I need to do this. Like there's something here that I need to help drive, and most of it is not easy because you're going against the grain, right? There's going to be a lot of people that look at what you're doing and go, you can't make money being nice. I mean, really, right? That's going to be, but can you? I mean, the data would actually show when you look at the culture and business results stats that you can.
Exactly. And that's really what I'm following, Jamie, as I've built this out, is saying, wait a second, some of the best companies out there have the best employee culture. And when you get that right and you inspire people, and that's the job of the leader from the beginning. It's not just checking off tasks for the organization. Anyone can do that, but can a leader go in and inspire people to bring out the best in themselves? And then not only that, not only get them excited, but then give them the tools and the autonomy to say, okay, do this. And so it's way more about partnering with your employees than it is lording it over.
Yeah, I love it. You have a unique perspective because of the business leaders you talk to, but also the business and the landscape that you're looking at in private equity. What do you think is the biggest business challenge, or some of the biggest business challenge that you're seeing, and whether companies recognize it or not? What do you think those big challenges are that are going to start to affect them?
There's a book that is everything I learned about business I learned in kindergarten, and that's gone throughout my career. Those principles that my parents instilled in me, right? That the integrity component, the service component, realizing that leadership is not about being able to afford nice things, which, it does come with a lot of perks, but it's not about the perks. It really is a service job. If you embrace that and you lean into that and you start to foster that, it gets a lot easier. This is what you're made to do as a leader. That's the calling of the leader, is really to go beyond. I just get so excited about the future of people like yourself taking on more of a conscious leadership approach and more of a conscious business ownership approach. And I see that coming to play more and more in what the future looks like for business. And it's the inclusion and belonging that you've talked about a lot in your own work of saying, first of all, I'm going to stop there because I feel like what I'd like to expound on is there aren't really institutions in society anymore. I think the pandemic really brought those down a lot. There are, people used to have, church as like a mainstay in their world, right? Or, the doctors used to be the authority, and there's just this different like postmodern view of like who actually is the authority, and that's changed and shifted over generations to the leaders to you really do have your own autonomy and you really are the authority and kind of the author of your life, right? And so understanding that in business and how the world works makes you very different, makes you need a very different skill set than what you would need in the past for leadership. And I'm sure you can go in and talk about this more
See it. I
yourself.
mean, there are leaders being made, and there are leaders who are rightfully questioning whether they want to be leaders anymore right now. And it's the right thing that should be happening. But there are people who, I read a lot of data, which I'm sure you do as well. And, they're looking at this next generation and saying they're going to leapfrog the previous generation for leadership roles because they actually have more tangible leadership skill sets. So what is it going to look like in a huge Fortune 500 company to have a 34-year-old leading a bunch of 50-plus-year-old people? Can a company even do that? Right. So I see that is a hurdle, but it's not about you've got 30 years of experience. Experience still matters, but I see this move away from domain expertise and experience to who you are, right? And those natural emotional intelligence, energy, like all of those being valued in a different way. And that's reassuring to me. It's very hopeful. And I think everyone else can learn that if you step towards it. And I think there's some leaders that have been under invested in, whether that's time or coaching or mentoring or training. We haven't done the work for the past 20 years on getting our leaders ready for what's next. And I mean, that's really what we're focusing on. And we don't just do that through like, let's sit in a room and train you. We do that in strategy rooms. That's leadership development. We do it in culture conversations. That's leadership development. And so, I just think we have to rethink a little bit on how we invest in our leaders and what the future of that looks like.
Yeah. And just with the technology advancements and the fact that in the next 5 years, we're going to see more technological advancements than we have even in the last 20 years, you have to have this agility around getting on to the next stage of what business really looks like, because it's changing so rapidly. And I think that can elicit a lot of fear and uncertainty, or it can elicit proactivity. What can I do today that's going to put me in the right spot and keep my business in the right spot to be agile, to be able to adapt to those changes? And me as an employee of a business, right? How do I get ahead of the curve so that my job isn't wiped out by AI, but instead I'm telling the AI what to do, right? Or whatever the technology is. I mean, I just remember this conversation of, oh, the internet's going to take my job, right? Well, now it's AI is going to take my job. There can be so much fear and anxiety around that, or you can empower people to start creating those solutions.
And it's taking an active versus passive role, whether you're a leader or an employee in your own. Nobody else is going to do this for you. You have to step out and decide, I want to do something different. So that's my next question for you is, how do you ensure that you're growing? Because it's also very easy for us to start a business and we're like, well, we're just like learning in the business, right? But how do you make sure that you're on a growth trajectory so you can stay in front of what's next and what's coming down the road? What's your growth approach for your personal growth?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm a huge personal development junkie. I have an amazing coach who I meet with. I read a ton of books. Jim Rohn is one of my favorite speakers, as well as I read a lot of business, finance, investing books. I try to read a book a week or listen to one audio wise. So I'm always ingesting that information. And I don't expect other people to be doing the same thing. But, one of the ways that I've kept really active is just kind of fractionally doing some CFO work on the side, which really helps when you're starting a business to have some more income coming in, right? But it really has helped me see even broader perspective of what's going on in the market. And so I think staying fresh with clients and talking to people has been a really great addition to keeping my skills, sharp. And there's so many ways to do that, whether it's interpersonal skills or, talking about economics or talking about, the different roles that you're in, and deepening that expertise in the industry that you're working in. There's just so many ways. And so I get like a kid in the candy store of like, what are the different skills that I can take on and improve as I go into running my own firm. And that's a sharpening tool in and of itself.
Yeah, I say a lot when we talk to leaders is action kills fear. So if there's something AI, take it right, that you're a little fearful about, go read about it, go research, go do even the smallest step can make that fear smaller, perceived fear smaller. And so I think constantly learning and moving ahead, because that knowledge is power as you're trying to navigate the landscape. Given everything we've talked about today, right? We've had a lot of good conversations, and the leaders that are listening, what's one thing that you'd be like, start here, right? Not just to not overwhelm, like do this, think about this, start here. What would that advice be?
I would say, going back to that initial quote that I said, knowing the conditions of your flocks and herds, not necessarily other people, right? Know where you're at in your journey. People call it the wellness wheel. Zig Ziglar had it as a kind of a life wheel of like, assess your financial wellness, your spiritual wellness, your health wellness, your job wellness, your relational wellness. Think about those things, and think about where the pain points really are right now, and seek to just take one little step every day towards making that better. I love that tool, and I go back to it on a very regular basis. I actually have a calendar reminder every month to like check in on my wellness wheel, and that helps me to align my goals. And so, just as my that's a personal development thing, but it really does take a huge effect on how the rest of life kind of falls into place.
All of our leadership trainings start with leading self before you can
Yeah.
lead others, before you can lead culture. So you have to be well. So it's a beautiful reinforcement of that we have to focus on ourselves. And it's not selfish as leaders. We're doing it because then we can be the best for the people who need us. And I think right now it's a good reminder, because there's a lot of leaders who aren't doing the selfish things, and it's showing up in their teams. Their teams are suffering because of it. Okay, I have a couple fun questions for you before we wrap here today. So these are a little
Awesome.
different. What does being ridiculously human mean to you? When I say those words, what pops into your head? What's that mean?
As I look at investments, and there's just a lot that can go into getting a deal done in my world. It's psychological, it's physically draining, it's psychologically draining, it's financially draining sometimes. It's a lot of risk, and with that risk people get really scared, and that's a human emotion, right? And just being in tune, going back to just being in tune with ridiculously human, like just acknowledging that there's a lot going on, acknowledging where you sit in that, and being transparent about it. I love connecting with business owners who are going through a big change, and selling a business is a really big change. Just acknowledging, taking the time in a human way to just acknowledge, hey, this is a process. Like you're about to really embark on something that's hard. Knowing that helps the process along so much, because if you are clammed up, and it's because of the anxiety you have around how are your people going to be treated after you sell your business, how is your legacy going to be treated, is the culture going to be the same, are my clients going to be happy with this, all the stuff that, and the worry that goes into selling a business, doing any kind of acquisition like that or exit. If you clam up and you don't talk about it, you're going to suffer, and it's going to come out in a bad deal being done. And so if you can acknowledge, okay, this is hard, I realize this, and go into it saying that if I'm not well throughout this process, meaning mental wellness and clarity, and just being able to take care of yourself a little bit and give yourself a break, it makes or breaks a deal. And so that's what I've experienced a lot in private equity, is those deals die not because of financial, reasons or factual reasons. It's the emotion that gets, and it's the emotion that isn't dealt with, that really kills a lot of really great deals from being done.
I think it kills a lot of things, right? Relationships and business,
Yes.
relationships. And if I think it's important for us to normalize, and this is the purpose of the podcast a little bit. It's the purpose of a lot of the work that I do too, is to say, hey, if you're feeling this way, or this happened, or success looked like this for you instead of what you thought it was supposed to look like, in the Hallmark movie, you're normal.
Yeah.
I just think the more we can normalize some of these things, people don't think there's something wrong, because it's when we have the shame and the guilt and we think something's wrong that I think we become less human, because we're putting up all sorts of barriers and affronts, right, to keep people out. When if we could just say, yeah, it sucks right now. There's no other word for it. And just be like, great, like, let's figure out how to get through it. It's just a very different conversation. And I think the world is yearning for more of that human to human interaction.
Absolutely.
Okay, last question. I'm giving you a billboard and you could put anything on it that you want to put on it. What would you put on the billboard?
Oh, those annoying Chris Lindahl billboards. And Chris, all power to you, man. You really
It's a
did that
marketing machine, but
big
yes, you love it
marketing
or you
machine.
hate it.
He's amazing. It's that boldness that kind of rises up inside of me, is like, look, private equity is changing. It's changing. And it's not the way that it used to be. There's business practices that don't, and they're not gonna be in this century anymore. And I'm really excited about changing the future of what private equity is turning 100 in 2046. It was initially started in the year 1946, was the first documented leveraged buyout. And so as it approaches its 100th birthday, I'm engaged in writing a book right now. And the book kind of seeks to ask the question, is private equity going to survive past its 100th birthday, or does it need to change and adapt in order to go into the future? And how I see the future of business and the future of humanity, it's a lot different than it has been in the past. And I quote Jerome Kohlberg, who is the founder of KKR, one of the biggest first private equity firms. He actually left KKR because he didn't. It's rumored that he didn't agree with their corporate rating practices back in the 1980s. And at his last shareholder meeting, he said, if you remove ethics, you kill the golden goose. And so my book seeks to kind of reflect on that quote and that question of, what does the future of business, what does the future of private equity look like? And I think it's going to be very different than how it's been in the past. And I'm seeking to break down the stories about it, and try to come to, like, what's the best way to do it.
Well, I have goosebumps and you've given me hope, which I feel exactly what you're feeling, right? From a different perspective. But I do have hope that we are coming to terms with things that haven't served us, and beliefs and judgments that aren't going to get us into the future. Whether they've gotten us here and we've been successful with them or not, they're not going to withstand into the future. And I think that's a beautiful place to end the podcast today. So thank you for being here and for sharing so vulnerably and open about your journey. I think it does. I know it impacts people. And to the listeners, I say this every time, but I do this podcast as a labor of love, but really as my own, desire to be around people that are redefining what success looks like and redefining what it means to really be human. And Leah, you are a perfect example of that. So thank you for being here. And I look forward to watching and seeing. So everybody should follow Leah. We'll make sure and put her LinkedIn profile in the podcast notes, because I think you're going to do really big things.
Thank you so much, Jamie. It was an absolute pleasure. You've built such an amazing organization over at Keystone, and I revere you guys so much. So thank you so much for the time today.
Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure and hit that subscribe button so you get the latest episodes as soon as we release them. And remember to keep maximizing your unique leadership superpowers. It truly is the key to building success, both in your career and in life.